Hello, lovely people of the internet. I'm Red June. I'm a person. I took 4 years of cello lessons when I was a kid and 2 years of oboe. And you can refer to me by whatever pronouns you feel most comfortable using. I want to start out with a trigger warning for today's video. If you are somebody who is sensitive about seeing people dead named or seeing people be misgendered. I am going to be talking about that. Not obviously, it's not going to be coming from me, but I'm going to be discussing those topics. So if that is something that is super sensitive for you, I will not be offended if you go ahead and click out if this isn't the video for you. Um, obviously, I try not to do those things myself, but yeah, I'm just going to be talking about some recent topics that have come up. So, um, those things are going to be discussed. I'm also going to be talking about my own personal experience. And I think that some people would consider that to be being dead named or being misgendered. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. I just wanted to kind of give a warning for anybody who is sensitive to that. These are kind of things that I've talked about in previous videos, but I haven't really been very straightforward about it. So I kind of wanted to do a video where I just really was kind of straightforward and talked about these things and just said them up front in a live stream. So hopefully you all can kind of see where I'm coming from with some of this. So obviously this comes on the heels of Elliot Page's announcement about him coming out as transgender. Um, and congratulations for him. Like that's like first thing on the docket is congratulations for him. I have said it in previous videos, but I just do want to reiterate how absolutely supportive I am of anybody finding their own true identity and being true to themselves, no matter what that entails. Um, I actually Some of you may know I lived under a rock when I was a kid. Um, so I did not know who Elliot Page was when I first saw this name in the headlines, and I did something that I'm gonna recommend that you guys don't do, and that is that I went and I looked up his dead name. Now, there's 3 reasons why I think that it was a bad idea for me to do that and why I don't suggest that you do that. The first one being that it was absolutely unnecessary. Like, I didn't know who Elliot Page was. Like, I still like now I know that he's in Umbrella Academy, which, like, sounds like a really cool show that I should probably check out. Um, I did kind of recognize Juno from when I was a kid. I don't think I saw the actual movie, but I do kind of, like, recognize the movie posters, but, like, if you don't recognize a picture of him and you don't recognize the surname Page, like, you're not gonna know who he is, so, like, you don't need to, like, go dead name him to find out who he is. I remember when one of my friends told me about when Caitlyn Jenner came out, and all she had to say was, "Oh, she's the step-parent of the Kardashians. She used to be a decathlete." And I was like, "Oh, I know who you're talking about. Duh." I didn't need her to, like, go into I didn't need her to dead name her. I didn't need her to misgender Caitlyn. I I needed, like, 2 facts, and I knew that I knew who it was, and I should have known that the opposite or the same or the opposite would be true when Elliot Page came out. So that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is kinda like I was talking about at the top of this video, that can be really triggering for somebody. Yeah, I think probably Elliot was aware that it was going to happen in the media, and so probably he knew that coming out, that it was gonna happen, but for a lot of people who aren't celebrities, they have their own experiences that they've gone through being misgendered, being dead named, and that can be really triggering to see that, even if it's somebody else going through that. That can be really triggering for their own personal trauma. So that's reason 2. Reason 3 is that you come across videos and articles like the one that I found, that I'm gonna talk about a little bit today, and that was a video that was misgendering, and dead naming. Mr. Page, Elliot Page. And, yeah. So, I really was taken aback by this video, just by kind of the response that was given to him. I was amazed. The woman's name, I believe, is Arielle Scarcella. I believe I'm saying that right. I hope I am. I apologize if I'm not. But she made a video addressing Elliot and also apparently, like, tweeted at him, tagged him in the tweet with this tweet that was like, "Oh, well, um, some women are transitioning because of internalized misogyny," and it's like, I don't think that that's where Elliot was coming from, and I think that that is, A rude assumption to make, and B, extremely rude to post that on Twitter, especially, like, coming after him like that, tagging him like that. Like, this just I was just, like, so upset to see that. So, I continued watching this video, and she continues to misgender Elliot, and dead name him, and then leaves us with this question of, like, where are all the lesbians going? And she tries to use, like, data to back it up, to say that, like, lesbians are, like, a dying breed, that they're, like, disappearing. Which the graph that she showed, was a real graph that she showed, but it actually wasn't showing the data that she said that it was showing. So it was saying, "Oh, that there's all of these people who are assigned female at birth who are transitioning," and it's, like, such a larger number of teenagers who are assigned female at birth who are transitioning. That's the terminology that I'm using. That's not the terminology that she was using, but it was kind of confusing even the way that she was saying it, and I was just like I had to run it back a couple of times. But I actually went and tracked down that graph and tracked down where the data came from for that graph, and it was actually just data of people, I believe it was in the UK and the NHS, who had been referred for some type of gender counseling therapy something, okay? So it might not have even been people who were trans. For instance, the the medication that is often prescribed for kids who are presenting as trans is actually a medication that can be prescribed to slow down somebody who hits puberty really early. For instance, I hit puberty. I was the first person in my class to hit puberty, um, when I was in I know by 3rd grade, I needed a bra. Um, I was also taller than almost everyone in my class, and it was very awkward going through that for me, and I think that it probably would have helped my mental health if I would have been able to take a medication. Not that I would have necessarily transitioned to grow up to be a man someday, but that it would have helped that sort of social stigma of, like, having boobs and BO and all of that stuff before any of my friends even knew what a period was. I was, like, well into, going through multiple tampons a day, and, and I just wasn't old enough really to, like, understand what was going on with my body. Um, Now later on, I'm gonna talk about that's not actually my first experience with having what now would be termed gender dysphoria. Um, I was born in the '80s, so a lot of this terminology is very new, and that's why I said in the title, like, I'm somebody who's been non-binary for 30 years. Um, but we'll get back to that. So she asked this question about where are all the lesbians going, which again, this data doesn't even reflect what she's saying. But also, Arielle, you're the same age as me. Okay. You were also born in the '80s. You remember the '90s when gay men and trans women were the butt of every single LGBT joke. Okay. Lesbians were taken seriously. Trans men were taken seriously. Less so. I think trans men were, like, less talked about, but, like, in the public eye, those of us who remember the '90s remember if any joke that was, like, an LGBT related joke always had to do with somebody who was assigned male at birth. People who were assigned male at birth were always the joke, the butt of the joke. And it was never punching up, it was always punching down. Whereas the opposite was true for lesbians. They, yes, sometimes were the butt of the joke, but it was almost always punching up. So, Arielle, I think you know the answer to that question. If you would like ask yourself, you would remember it's not even where are the lesbians going? It's where are all the trans women? Where are all the gay men? Where are they? And the reason that we don't see them is because they don't feel comfortable coming out, and they still are starting to feel comfortable coming out, but it's not as supported as it could be, as supported as it is when it comes to lesbians being supported. And now even trans men, non-binary people who are assigned female at birth, those are being more supported. So yes, we are going to see an increase when non-binary and trans men have never been supported before. Yes, we're going to see an increase in those. And it's going to be a large increase relative to the increase that we're seeing in acceptance of lesbians, because lesbians already were accepted for a large part. Not obviously not across the board. I'm not going to say that. But I will say, like, for myself, as somebody who, like, now I identify I would say I'm pansexual genderqueer is usually like what I use to identify my gender and my sexuality. I'm not much concerned about genitals. It's really kind of the way that I think about it, I guess. We did not always have that language. Again, I was born in the 80s. So for me, excuse me. Oof, my throat. Again, I was born in the 80s. I was born in the boonies. I still live in the boonies. Um, I'm not in an area that's even like LGBT accepting at all, GRSM accepting. But if I were to date a woman in the community that I live in, if I wanted to be um, public about that, especially growing up, it has changed more in the past 5 years. But growing up as a teenager, if I had dated another female teenager, a girl, I would be much more accepted coming out in my community as lesbian than I would be coming out as bisexual, pansexual, um, trans man, any any of those other bits and pieces of the LGBT GRSM puzzle. Lesbians were more accepted here, and like I said, a very rural, very conservative community. So to me, that says that probably overall lesbians were accepted more than other groups. So, yeah, I think you should remember that, Ariel. And that's the final thing that I kinda wanted to talk about today is kind of just my own story of where I found out that I was non-binary, which has been a very long process. Like I said, I have known who I was as a person for over 30 years, but we did not have the vocabulary for it 30 years ago. So I kinda wanted to talk about that just a little bit. And I wanna talk about that kind of from, like, a humorous level because if I do, like, get too, deeply emotional about it, it will, like, make me upset, and, like, I it shouldn't make me upset because, like, seriously, a lot of it is actually just really funny. And my first memory actually is, like, a gender-related memory, and it is a funny memory when I, like, look at it from the outside. So, that memory is my first week of school, preschool. Um, I met boys my own age for the very first time. Now, before this, I had an older brother, and I, in my little toddler brain, had just always assumed that someday I would get the choice or someday, like, there would be some type of, like, metamorphosis that would happen that I don't know if I thought that I would have a decision, like, but I was like, "Someday I'm going to get to be a boy," right? It might happen. And when I went to preschool, it was the first time that I ever met boys my own age. And I think before that, I had just, like, assumed that it was, like, an age thing, like, "Oh, my brother's older than me, so he got to be a boy first." And I just, like, assumed that he was a girl when he was born. And I came home from school, and I was like, "Okay, mom, I don't know how we go about this process, but, like, I'm ready to begin the process. I'm ready to, like, be a boy." And my mom told me that I would be a girl forever. And I remember it was, like, the most devastating thing to me as a toddler at 3 years old that I was told I would never be a boy. I would be a girl forever, that I would grow up and one day be a woman, and there was nothing that I could do about it. And I remember, like, having this whole conversation with my mom where I was just, like, losing my shit, and she's, like, telling me, like, "No, like, the doctors, like" basically saying, like, "The doctors assigned you female, like, you're female," and it's just like, "No, like, they're wrong, like, the doctors are wrong, there has to be some type of mix-up," and my mom's like, I don't know what to tell you, there isn't a mix-up, like, we know that you're a girl, you know like, we know that you're gonna grow up and be a woman someday." And when I watch these videos by, like, Arielle Scarcella and, um, other people who, like, talk about, oh, that, like, it must be this societal misogyny that is, like, making these women not wanna identify as women, talking about people like me who are genderqueer, and, like, how? How? As a three-year-old, I had 0 society, misogyny, anything to relate it to, like, all I knew was my preschool of, like, boys and girls, and I was like, "Yeah, like, that's I wanna do like, I'm ready to do boy stuff, like, I don't want like, if I have to choose between these, I'm ready to choose boy." Right? And, I mean, luckily, I grew up in a world where 2020 happened, and I can say, "You know what? I'm not a boy, I'm not a girl, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm just a person." And, like, that's okay. Um, but as a toddler, I didn't live in that world, and it was absolutely just I could not deal with it as a kid, and I, like, lost my shit, and I just remember, like, crying myself to sleep that night because I was just so utterly upset at the thought of, like, being a girl forever. It was just, like, this absolutely horrible thought to me, and I did eventually kind of come to terms with it. My parents gave me a very gendered name, which, again, I did not realize as a toddler that I had an extremely gendered name, and I think that was sort of, as I got older, I definitely stopped using that name pretty quickly, um just because I never felt like it really identified me. Anytime that I met someone else who had that first name, they were people who strongly identified as girls or strongly identified as women, and I was like, "This is not I'm not that name." And so, for me, I don't personally have an issue with, like, any pronouns being used. I've never had, like, a set of pronouns where I was like, "That's my pronouns." So, I've never like, really identified with any set of pronouns. I don't feel like I'm ever being misgendered when anybody uses whatever pronouns. But I do know that feeling of somebody, like, using my birth name, and, like, even when I tell them, like, "I don't use that name, that's not really my name, that's not how I identify myself," and them continuing to use it. My ex would do that, and he was like, "I just really love it," and he would call me that, like, endearingly, and it would just, like, make me cringe, and that is how I think about how it must feel for people when they have a problem with being misgendered or being dead named. It's probably like that kind of feeling, or at least that's what I can relate it to. I don't know what that feeling is like, but I do know what the feeling for me of somebody using my birth name is, and it's just like, "Oh, I hate it." It's like nails on a chalkboard. It's yeah, it makes my skin crawl. Um, but yeah, obviously as a toddler, I didn't figure out like, "Oh, I'm genderqueer," and, like, that vocabulary didn't just, like, all of a sudden become available to me. That vocabulary didn't even exist back in the '80s. It wasn't a thing. And I can tell you about my roommates when I went away to college, and I lived in a dorm for a while, and then I lived in a house for a while with roommates. Most of my roommates were men. I just have a tendency to get along better with men, or at least I did at that point in my life. Now I kinda have more of a mix of, any and all genders, I guess you could say, as friends, but, at that point in my life, I did mostly have men, in my friend group, and I remember one time overhearing my roommate talking to his girlfriend about his roommate, Red, and he was like, "Red's just like a person, like, we like, we call her she because, like, she's got, like, boobs and stuff, but, like, she's just, like, one of the dudes," and, like, now in 2020, I think that that would be, like, offensive to some people to hear that, but, like, it made me smile. Like, this is in the early 2000s, so, like, I mean, he was on the phone with his girlfriend, so, like, that'll date it a little bit. Um But, like, we didn't have terms like I think genderqueer was a word back then. I looked it up, and it was, like it had been used in the New York Times, like, once, but I had not ever heard of it. It certainly wasn't like I said, we lived in, still a pretty rural area. Yes, I did move away to college to, like, a bigger city, but it was still "Hello." Um, it was still, like, a pretty rural area that we grew up in, and we didn't certainly didn't have any terminology for non-binary, genderqueer, anything like that. But it was just one of the things where, like, my roommates would sometimes refer to, "You're also genderqueer. Nice to meet you, lazy baby. I'm glad to have you here." Um, yeah, I feel like as somebody who has kind of and a demi boy. I my husband, I think it kind of maybe falls on the demi-man, um, spectrum. It's something that he's kind of been exploring a little bit more recently, but yeah, he also, like he and I, have also, like, kind of felt the way that we have felt about our genders, like, for forever. It's just, like, that only recently become we've begun to find the vocabulary for it. And so, like I was saying, with my roommates, they would, like, often refer to, like, "Oh, the other dudes," even though, like, they were putting me in the group with the guys and not necessarily putting me in the group with the women, but it wasn't ever, like, an offensive thing. And it wasn't until, I think probably, like, 2016 was the first time that I heard the term genderqueer. I'd never heard it before. I think I had maybe heard the term pansexual before, but a friend of mine I had moved down south, and a friend of mine came to me and he was like, "Hey, I heard this interview on the radio with this person that identified as genderqueer pansexual, and that sounds like you." And I remember that was, like, the first time that I heard the term genderqueer, and it just, like, clicked. And at this point in time, like I said, I had started going by, a gender neutral name. I wore men's underwear. I was not I never felt like I had, like, a gender category that I fit into, and so when my friend said that to me, I was like, "Yeah, like, I think that's what I am. I'm genderqueer." And I guess it, like to me, it answered all of these questions that I'd had for so long that I had just pushed aside. And now when I see videos by Blair White, by Arielle Scarcella, by, um, Kalvin Garrah was, like, one of the more recent ones. It's like when I see their response to somebody who is coming out as non-binary or genderqueer, and they're, like, saying, "Oh, well, like, that you're not really trans, or you're not really your gender," like, I explain to three-year-old me that came home from preschool and had no concept of societal misogyny and was absolutely devastated to find out that I was always gonna be a girl. Explain to three-year-old me how that was a thing that was a societal pressure, that I really was a girl, but I just didn't know any better. I'm trying to come out again to my parents for the first time. Yeah. Um, I I tried to kind of first come out to my parents as, bisexual was the term that I used when I was in college, and it did not go well, and that has been that's been over 10 years ago now. So, it's not something that, the second time went better, I guess, is maybe, um, but I think sometimes if you plant the seed, that you can come back around to it. I I luckily have very loving parents who I knew they were going to love me either way, and even if they didn't understand it, um, I was just, like, at a point where I was like, "I don't wanna have this conversation," and, like, um, I kinda, like, backed out of the conversation, was just like, "You know what? Like, let's just, like, shut this down, and we're not gonna talk about it anymore." Um And I seriously think that my mom just, like, disappeared it from her brain because then later on, when I talked to her and we actually just had this, like, weird side conversation where she was asking about like, she was filling out a quiz online and just, like, asking me questions, like, rapid fire questions. And she was like, "Okay, are you in your 30s? Yes. Are you straight?" And I was like, "No." And she was like, "Wait, what?" And, I was like, "No." And she was like, "Okay, so, like, what are you?" And I was like, "Well, like, I'm pansexual." And she, like I tried to explain that a little bit more, and she wasn't getting it, and I was like, "Okay, can we just, like, move on to the next question?" And we just moved on to the next question, and, like, I left her to, like, go research that on her own, and, like, we haven't really, like, talked about it since then, but it's, like, been, like, side commented on. So, I think that she is starting to get it, and she is starting to, like, be more accepting about it. As far as being genderqueer, I my dad has a little bit of dementia going on, and so I have had to explain it to him, like, multiple times, and, like, at this point, I've gotten pretty practiced at it, but my first time telling my mom, I was absolutely terrified, and, if you haven't watched my videos in the past, I am a certified nail tech, and, obviously, like, there's a plague on right now, so, like, I'm not doing nails right now, but, I am trained to do nails, and I will oftentimes, like, offer to do my mom's nails, especially, like, if I get a new polish, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I love this polish, but, like, I don't need to put it on my nails. Mom, sit down. I'm gonna do your nails." And she's a great guinea pig. And I had kind of been talking about it with friends and stuff, and she had, like, overheard me discussing it, and I had overheard her kind of, like, talking with her friends on the phone that she did not understand in the news, this whole, like, non-binary thing. And I think that was the terminology that she was using was non-binary. And I, like, sat her down with the, like not that it was a lie, but I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do your nails." And then, like, while I was doing her nails and, like, holding her hand where she, like, physically could not get away from me, I was like, "Oh, by the way, when they're talking about, like, non-binary people, that's, like, people like me." And kind of, like, explained that, like I kind of explained about how, like, my roommate had said when I was in college that, like, I was just a person and I wasn't really a man or a woman. Like, yes, they used she, her pronouns for me, but, like and then I explained that, like, some non-binary people just prefer they, them pronouns, or some non-binary people only prefer one set of pronouns, and it's different depending on who they are. But for me, like, you don't need to change anything, just, like, maybe, like, don't refer to me as your daughter, you know? And that was like, she physically could not get away from that conversation. So I think that I had that on my side, but I also knew that, like, she wasn't going to be mad about it. She wasn't ever gonna be like, "You're gross and you're not my kid," or whatever, you know? So, I knew that she was always gonna, like, come to it from a place of love. So, my suggestion for you is that if you have parents that you know will come to it from a place of love, maybe just, like, keep trying to, like, set that seed there, and then, like, when you have, like, planted the seed and you know that it's, like, been planted and had time to germinate, if they still haven't responded, then, like, maybe do find some type of, like, activity that you can be like, "Hey, here's this activity that you are roped into and, like, you can't get away from it." And, like, yes, we can change the conversation and talk about different things, but, like, you can't physically run away from me while I'm trying to tell you about this thing. If your parents are not as great as mine are, like, I hate to, like, think about people who are in a position where their parents are not supportive. But, like, that's a reality for a lot of people, and if you are in a situation where you might become unsafe, if you come out to your parents, you have to make the decision that's right for you, and I do not suggest anybody coming out in a place where they don't feel like they're going to be safe, that they're not gonna have a place to sleep that night, that they're in any way your parents aren't supportive. Yeah, at that point, like, do what is right for you and take the steps that are right for you. And if you can plant a seed without disrupting the calm, plant the seed. But if you can't, you can keep that seed and save it for yourself and wait until you are in a safe place and then deal with that. Especially if you are somebody who depends on the support of your parents. Because don't put yourself in an unsafe situation. Um because that can snowball into an even more unsafe situation. So, wait, and I know that it's hard, but try and reach out to people online. Try and reach out to if there are people in your physical community, that's nice, but if there aren't, there are supportive groups online. Do be careful to vet whoever it is that you're talking to. Don't give out personal information about your address, your real name, anything like that. But if you do need just, like, somebody to talk to, reach out online and wait until you are in a place where if you have to cut off all contact completely, you can, and it is a safe thing for you to do. Don't put yourself in an unsafe situation. And I understand that there are people who get to a point where not saying anything gets to where it can be unsafe, and, like, absolutely, there are resources available for people who are in that situation, but if you can avoid it, absolutely avoid it. Mine are kinda supportive, but not to pronoun and hairstyle. Okay, yeah, um, hairstyle is a little bit easier than pronoun, is kind of what I have found. Now I did get away with hairstyle a lot when I was a kid just because, like, I would cut my own hair and it would be like, "Oh, how you gonna fix it? If we gotta go to the barber and the barber's gonna have to fix it, but, like, it's short, so what you gonna do?" I did deal with that a lot, but also there are more, like, androgynous hairstyles now. So, if maybe something like that mine is really grown out right now because of the plague, but, I have done, like, the shaved sides for a while. Um, my mom doesn't like it, but, it's I also like, I can part it on one side or the other and, like, put it in a bun or whatever, and, like, still it looks very feminine. If I feel like presenting feminine, I can absolutely present it in a feminine way. Um, so maybe something like that. Find somebody to cut it for you, though, because I like, anytime I try to do, like, trim it up even myself, I, like, mess it up. So, um if you can get help with it. Like, this hairstyle, I know it's very grown out, but, it can look very androgynous, but it can also look very feminine if you put it down. Would be my suggestion for that. But I'm a little bit partial to my hairstyle, so, you know, if there's something else that works for you. I did a pixie cut a lot as a kid, and a pixie cut, if you gel the back of it, it can also look very androgynous. It doesn't look this I can make it look pretty masculine when I do, like, almost like a man bun on the back. It does look very masculine where I feel like the pixie cut more just kinda goes into the androgynous territory. It doesn't quite tip as far into masculine. But then that's also another one where if you, like, actually shave the back, it does look more masculine. It's a pixie cut is usually a little bit more feathered in the back, but if you shave up to that, like, hairline about here, it does look more masculine. Um, I know that because I did it myself one time and my mom was like, "A pixie cut'll fix it," and it's like, "Yeah, sort of." But I did that when I was a kid. Yeah, pronouns are something that, like, I never had an issue with it. Um, but like I said, I did have an issue with my birth name is a very feminine birth name, and it it hurts to hear people call me that. So I have very deep sympathy for you going through that. Um, yeah, if are you okay with using they them pronouns, or do you prefer um like binary pronouns, just not the pronouns that you were born with? Um, because I think maybe for some people it's a you prefer they them, okay. For some people, I think it's a grammatical thing, that they don't understand that they them can be a singular pronoun. So, maybe just in conversation when you're talking about people, even if you're talking about binary gendered people, try using they them pronouns just to, like, kind of work it into the conversation to where it's more a comfortable part of the conversation, and I've noticed that for myself, that even when I'm talking about people with binary gender, that I will just kinda default to they them, and a lot of times I will only specifically use she, he pronouns to differentiate, "Oh, this male person versus this female person in this conversation," and if I'm just talking about a singular person, I just use they, them. If it's obvious, I just use they, them. And I think that has become more I can see it in my parents' language, that they are using more they, them just to refer to a person that they might not know who they're referring to. And especially for my parents' generation, it has always been very much he is the standard. If you don't know a person's gender, for my parents' generation, they would default to he. And then sometimes it would be like or she in parentheses. But it was always kind of defaulted to he, and I can see that change in my parents where they're starting to default to they, them more. So, that's kind of my suggestion, and I like I said, it's going to be little changes, it's going to be little seeds, especially for parents if they are, like, set in their ways. They they might have even had a gender reveal party for you, like, when you were a baby, and, like, you know that they like, you've probably seen the ornaments on the trees that are like the "It's a whatever gender baby," and it's it's going to be hard for them. But if they are coming from it from a place of love, those little seeds will start to germinate. But it's gonna take lots of little seeds. So that's my suggestion to somebody who is trying to come out to their parents, um, and just keep seeing it from a place of love because, like, my dad oh my god, my dad will say stuff to me sometimes where it's just like, he will actually, like, refer to me like, "Oh, daughter," and I'm like, "Oh, we've had this conversation, like, 5 times," and, like, I know that he doesn't mean it to hurt my feelings. I know that, like, he means it like, "I love you, you're my daughter." And what he means is, "I love you, you're my child," but to him, that's the vocabulary that he's used to using, and everyone in his generation is used to using, so it is hard. Um, so, yeah, just keep at it and keep it try to keep it in a place of love, and try I know that they're gonna say hurtful things, I know that they're gonna say them, but try to understand that they don't mean them from a hurtful place, and that's not to say that they don't hurt, that's not negating the pain that they feel, but it's also just trying to see the other side of it also. So, I hope that helps, and I'm probably gonna jump off here, unless you have any more questions. Um, but I am running on it's like 40 minutes now. I was gonna try and make this like a 20. You do have more questions? What you got? I will try and answer questions for you. I've got a few more minutes that I can be on. I do need to start wrapping it up, but, if you got more questions, I can try and answer more. No, thanks. Okay. Okay. Well, keep on keeping on. Oh, thank you. Bless you too. Thank you. Um, hang in there. It really does get better. I know that, like, you get into, like, a dark place where you're like, "This never gets better," and, like, trust me, it does get better. It doesn't, like, always stay better, and it doesn't like, it's not always on top of the mountain from there on out, but it does. Like, when you're down in that valley, like, it might feel like just, like, darkness is closing in, but, like, it does get better. So, please try and remember that, and try and stay positive. I know that it's hard sometimes, but it does get better. All right, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will be back on probably later this week. Yeah, because it's Monday, so I will have at least one more live stream later this week. So, I hope to see you then. Thanks.